فانصب وإلى ربك فارغب صدق الله العظيم.
Thank you very much, Salman. Now I'd like to introduce our first session. The first session is titled Growth Prospects of the PSDP. This is going to be a 1.5 hour session, and the session will be chaired by Mr. Mohammad Jahanzeb Khan, Deputy Chairman Planning Commission. And in the session, Vice Chancellor PIDE, Dr. Nadeemul Haq, will be presenting his presentation titled Reforming Pakistan's Development Budget. So over to you. The session will be chaired by Mr. Mohammad Jahanzeb Khan, Deputy Chairman, Planning Commission.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for joining us for this session today. Are we ready with the presentation? So, I will now request Dr. Nadeemul Haq, Vice Chancellor of PIDE, to present his findings.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chairman. I hope everybody can hear me. Acha ji. I think what the Deputy Chairman says, he's in charge of the development budget. And development budget is a very important aspect of our economy. And we talk and argue about it all the time. So we thought that at the PIDE, one thing that one thing that everybody talks about is what is our contribution to the country. So we thought we'd start with kind of looking at the development budget and trying to hold a conversation on the development budget, because this is a system that has been in place for the last 70 years, ever since the Harvard Advisory Group and Mahbubul Haq initiated this. So I think Mahbubul Haq should be given a lot of credit for kind of being the first Pakistani to discuss this. So to actually contribute to setting up the system. The system is actually quite good, and I think we should all be proud of the system. But and the development budget has done a lot of good work. I remember that when I was in the same seat as Jahanzeb, I was asked by the Prime Minister once, what does the development budget do? So my take was, look at Constitution Avenue. Everything has been named by the development budget. But the question is how we utilize it. So that's where the presentation kicks off. Now here what we are trying to do basically is, Aage kar deji, I don't think this clicker works. So what you're trying to do here is really, please try and think of it. This is supposed to be a very constructive dialogue. Our object is not to criticize anybody. Our object is not to start a political controversy, etc. Our object is to do research and start discussing the development budget. We've got former secretaries, we've got former members of the Planning Commission, we've got current members, current deputy chairman, everybody here. I hope we've got all the key stakeholders. I think we have some donors too. We have certainly IMF here. So I think we just want a constructive dialogue on this to see how the system has served us, and I think it has served us very well up to now. The question is, we are now in the 21st century. How should we go forward in the 21st century? Because ultimately the job of the development budget is to give us growth. So our main point is that we must have growth. Now, the Harvard Advisory Group system, as I said, which we run now, the Mahbubul Haq system, I call it the Haq-Hag system. And I think we should give credit to Mahbubul Haq. Haq-Hag system has done very well by us. So the question is, do we need revision or do we have the same system? And then we'll talk about the role of planning, which is also subject to controversy. Should planning be conducted the same way as it was or not, or should it change? And then of course we should talk about what the public assets are. So this is the kind of themes that we're going to pursue. Now, next slide. This is a study, I must give credits first. This is a study that is based on not just myself, but 3 other people. Hamid Mukhtar, everybody knows him, World Bank staff member for a long time, now retired. Hamid, one of our best economists in the country. Hamid, unfortunately, I don't think has made it because his wife is sick. Numan Ishtiaq, who's sitting here, used to be the ghost in the finance ministry. John Gray, he's sitting there too. He's Oxford Policy Management. He helped organize the study and conducted it. So these are my co-authors. I should give them credit. I should also give credit to 3 other people who've contributed to this. PIDE has an ongoing study in the Planning Commission based on the request of the Deputy Chairman. And we are doing a study on the planning system at the request of the Planning Commission. Nasir Iqbal, Khalid Mahmood, and Faraz are involved in it, so I've got some segments from there too. I thought we'd combine our study rather than waste our time making presentations, because really want much more for dialogue to happen. So I'll make a short presentation and make room for you people to share your views. Now, what do we have? The main thing that we're going to discuss is, and I think this is a question that all of us as citizens of Pakistan should ask, is the PSDP leading to growth? I think growth is the fundamental concern of the economy right now. Although the newspaper is full of inflation, I think the bigger concern is growth. Growth has come down to, as the IMF says, 2.4%, but other people are saying even less. Saveed Pasha, for example, says 1.9. I don't see the difference in 1.9 and 2.4, but nevertheless, growth is low. It's below our population growth, which is worrisome. So per capita incomes will decline this year. So the question is, we really need to ask, is the PSDP giving us a return for our money? Should it be creating growth or should it not be creating growth? And that's where we begin. Now, the basic thing that we've done in the study is a comprehensive study. Now we've also got a book published in it. You get a book, you get a copy of the book. It's called Doing Development Better. And we looked at the history of planning and saw how it goes. We've looked at the role of the public and private investment in the economy. We've looked at the efficiency of the PSDP used in different methodologies. We've looked at PSDP processes and role of different stakeholders. We've looked at the factors that impact negatively on the efficiency of the PSDP as well as positively. And of course, nothing can end without talking about reform ideas. So we've got several reform ideas on the table that should be thought through and looked at. None of them are drastic, as they should not be drastic, but I think it's a question of really re-examining where we're going. So let me begin. The first thing is, let's look at what the PSDP impacts on growth or not. Now here are some studies that have been done, a couple of them in the PIDE, the rest outside, some old, some new, but you can see consistently the evidence that is coming out based on econometrics is that the PSDP does not impact the growth positively, which is very worrisome as far as I'm concerned, that the PSDP as a whole is not very good at impacting growth positively. In fact, the impact of the PSDP on growth may be negative or insignificant. So that is worrisome. And we can parse the thing in short term and long term. Be a small fillip to growth. We did that once here in the Planning Commission. I got Dr. Pasha to do it, and it was 0.07% in the short term, but in the long run it was negative. So 0.07 is very small, and long term is negative. So that's a key message that I think we should worry about. Why is the PSDP not impacting growth? Now here's what Iqbal, etc., the kids who are doing this now, they did, Iqbal, Mahmood and Faraz, that these people are looking at the multipliers, and you can see that the multipliers that the PSDP generates, or the public sector growth program, or the public investment generates. For the public investment, for private investment, it's significant and positive. For the public investment, it's very small and almost insignificant. It is insignificant, sorry, but it is 0.05, which is again very small. So we have to worry about this a lot. Why is the PSDP not? If you look at this, for example, again, looking at the impacts, right? The public sector is again very, very small, and we have to think about it. Why is the public sector so small? Compared to the rest of the world, the public sector is very small, and that is something that we have to worry about. So here we have the first result, which is very important, which I want you to discuss and bear in mind. If the public sector investment, and we did other estimates in the paper, in the book you'll see, if the public sector investment is not working, should we continue to have it? and how should we do it? It's not about not having it, but can we do it better or can we not do it better? So that's the key message that we have. Okay. Now, if we look at the question of why, I think the question of why is very important, and we have to worry about why. We see one thing is very important. Planning has been on the back foot since, if I think about it, since 1973, which is a crazy story, but nevertheless, it was the Bhutto government that kind of, which is a socialist government, but we didn't want planning, because the Bhutto government wanted to do the projects that they wanted to do without discipline. So planning has been on the back foot since then, and planning, and then the fund programs came in, so planning has been on the back foot, so brief history. And now we've been in the realm of austerity for a long time, where there is hardly any room for operational improvements, and we are really into a world where the budgets have been slashed. And yes, we can go into the genesis of that, but that is not the subject of the discussion today. But the key thing is that planning as a system has been attenuated over time. And we make these 5-year plans that nobody looks at. So in a sense, the key message is we have no overarching strategy for planning. We have a series of projects. We have fragmentation. So any ministry wants to set up a project. It used to be under the of the plan, but that's gone. And now ministries do their own projects. There's no central theme that ties them together. And the most important thing that's missing there is CB. What is CB? Does anybody remember? Any? Cost benefit. Cost benefit analysis has almost disappeared. And you'd be surprised to know the US government takes its cost benefit very seriously. In fact, there's a famous Reagan memo that came out, and it put cost benefit at the center of the US government. Anything that happens, there has to be a cost benefit analysis. Anything in the government has to go through cost benefit analysis. There's an Office of Institution and Regulatory Analysis or whatever, of which the head was Gassenstein, and he's written a book on it that, hey, cost benefit analysis is central, but we've given up cost benefit analysis. So we've got fragmentation, we've got a project focus. Everything is project now. Programs are missing, the overarching theme is missing, and that's something that I think, again, is what I would say. I would say that's worth thinking about. So planning is on a back foot. There are no sectoral plans. The Education Ministry doesn't have a plan, Health Ministry doesn't have a plan, Energy Ministry. There's no overarching plan, which used to be, the plan used to be a set of plans, sectoral plans which you don't have. There's obviously, because of austerity, there's a lack of predictability on future in current budgets, and yes, contractors have learned it's the best thing to do to have a planning commission contract, and then you don't have releases, so you can do, so yes. But then because the cost benefit analysis lacking, we have project identification which is very weak, and then we politicize the project, and there I'm afraid Dr. Mahboob somewhat to blame that we politicize the project, so that's become a problem too. So on balance, the PC1 system, which is a good system, which really is a good system, all it meant was you do your cost benefit seriously and then you do some M&D. The PC1 system has become attenuated because the PC4s, PC5s don't get filled. You don't have the, what do you call it, adequate scrutiny. At the same time, the cost benefit analysis has been weakened. So we got the PC1 system, which is a good system, but it has been attenuated, and we have to think about that. Now, the fragmentation is that projects entering the budget, you know, there are all kinds of systems. I don't need to plead to you. Many people here know about that. There are too many small projects, big throw forward, all kinds of things. So I don't think I'll belabor that point. Everybody knows all these weaknesses, and I think we should stay away from them because yes, there are weaknesses, we know that. It's not a question of just simply saying, oh, we should do more this analysis. And we should worry about the system as a whole. And we should worry about why cost-benefit analysis is gone and why monetary implementation is so weak and can it be revived? Is it an overall strategy or not? Those are important items, not worrying about individual things whether they throw forward or not. The main thing in the project, as far as I can see, one of the things that the PSDP has is too much brick and mortar. So, for example, we built 200 universities, 220 universities. And I did a study last year, it's a book published on research. There are only 7 professors per university. Now, all of you have been to university. All of you know that a good university, every department has at least 20 to 30 professors. And we made universities without professors. Then we worry about quality. Tariq Banuri tells me he tried to hire some people and he couldn't find anybody worth hiring out of 1,000 people he interviewed. So that's a serious indictment. That's a very serious indictment. And what do we do about this, right? But that's because we've been investing in costs and benefit, in brick and mortar. We don't have enough programs and outcomes. We are missing in our strategy when we made the framework in economic growth here in the Planning Commission. The most important thing that we noticed that was missing in our growth was productivity. But the PSDP has very little to do with productivity. We do very little productivity analysis, productivity, and capacity utilized. The other thing that worries us is projects that we make are underutilized. Take the example of universities I gave you. Come with me to Islamabad University at 3 in the afternoon, it's finished. So we are utilizing the capacity, not even 50%. Come with me to the convention center, it's 100% not utilized. Come with me to the sports stadiums, 100% not utilized. Why are we building assets if we're not utilizing them? But that's because we have no monitoring and evaluation. So that's another thing that we have to think about it. Right? So we've got this fragmentation and inadequate, this is a chart that shows you how much brick and mortar we have. If you can think about it, it's all infrastructure, social sector, which we call it. Again, mainly building. Other thing, most of the PSDP is building. And you can see that here, for example, these people, Nasir Iqbal and his team has done this thing where they have looked at priorities over the years. You can see it's been energy and transport. They eat up most of the, which is basically roads and building power plants, right? And you've got the same thing here, and now you can see roads have taken over. Roads are the largest section. And I remember conducting this study here, and in fact Hafiz Pasha did this for me when I was here, that roads do not lead to growth. So it's an important thing to bear in mind. Okay, so we've got this issue now that issue of assets is very important. As far as I'm concerned, when you invest, you create assets. I mean, this is accounting, elementary accounting. You only invest to create assets. So are we creating assets? And if we are creating assets, Mr. Deputy Chairman, where is the rate of return? Why are we not looking at the rate of return? And if we have adequate rates of return on the assets, for example, in creating assets, if we did the adequate cost-benefit analysis, we would target the right rate of return. And if we monitored those projects well and did them well, we'd have an adequate rate of return. If we had an adequate rate of return on all our projects, we would have growth. That is the key thing. And if we did got an adequate rate of return, we would be able to lever our assets for more growth. You could finance them. And that's the problem. This is why I told the Prime Minister, hey, the entire Constitution Avenue is built by PSDP, but the problem is there's no return from that. If there was a return, we'd have growth. So I think we have to have that kind of an accountant's mentality in the PSDP, that we are creating assets and those assets must have returns. Now, here's another chart that we've got to you that we have to see that, look, our PSDP is declining over the years. And yes, that's austerity, our PSDP has to decline. Even more reason why, ladies and gentlemen, we should worry about the return on our projects. We don't have enough money to invest. So whatever we invest must be high return. That's why cost-benefit analysis becomes important. Now let's come to the reform proposal very quickly. Yes, of course, I think the PC1 process should be tightened. At the center of it is cost-benefit analysis, and we must take a cost-benefit analysis as seriously as the US government does. US government takes it very seriously. No project can go through without cost-benefit analysis very clearly being shown, and the Office of OIRA, whatever it is, really has to do what they call a regulatory impact analysis. That regulatory impact analysis goes to Congress. The Congressional Office does another, Budget Office does another impact analysis. That's the only way that they go forward on every proposal. Here, we must think about it, how to do it. But then again, there's no point in doing just simple regulatory analysis or cost-benefit analysis if we don't have an overarching sectoral plan and overarching theme. Where are we investing? Why are we investing? For example, if everybody wants to make a sports stadium, why? When we don't have a sports industry, why are we building a sports stadium? So these kind of questions need to be asked, and they're not bad to ask these questions. But then again, we've got another system that the Prime Minister is asking for, and I think the Planning Commission is the center of it, which is called this thing, result-based management system. So if you've got a results-based management system, should we have an input-based management system? Because the PSDP is an input-based management system. So if you've got an input-based management system and you've got a results-based management system, how are the two consistent? I mean, those are things that we have to think about. So if you've got an RBM, should we move to an RBM system, or should we the input-based system with an RBM system? These are mega questions that I think we need to think about, and too little thought is devoted to these questions. Now, if you think about it, the HUG-HAG model, Nabula, not me, Nabula and H. Harvard Advisory Group model, basically relied on central planning and a project focus. And the third element of that was aid. So we are still running on that model where we have a series of projects and we have a balanced payments gap and we look for aid. Do we need to change that model or not? Secondly, we don't have a growth focus, we have a project focus. And we need to think about that project focus. Should we have a project focus or not? Then of course, we've got too much hardware, we've got brick and mortar, but we don't have enough software, so we have to think about that. I think a very important question to ask is, in the case of an RBM, should we have a development budget? Or should we allow, like many countries, the ministries to have their own budgets, consolidated current and investment budget, and let them manage them through an RBM framework which the Prime Minister wants, and he's already got that going, which means when they have an RBM framework, they'll do sectoral policies, sectoral plans, and they'll give you projects, etc. within those plans, within those outcomes, and you manage the outcomes. And that, so it's an important thing to think about. Now, Monet and Gray have already done the Green Book in the Ministry of Finance, which does some kind of a results system. If we integrate it in the Planning Commission and take it seriously, would that be a better system? I leave it for you to discuss, but I think these are options that we need to think about and talk about. We did put this in the framework of economic growth, but it never got implemented. Our point was move from an input focus to an outcome focus. Let the ministries have their RBMs, manage the results, and stop worrying about, hey, how they're using the money. Then they have more sanity, because right now there's another thing that occurs. Ministries, this is well known, I don't have to belabor it, but ministries set up projects which they have no intention of maintaining, because they have nothing in their current budget that will allow them to maintain the projects. So we have a bunch of that are lying empty, bunch of these things that are lying underutilized. Why? Because they didn't plan for that project to be outcome focused. They just built it and moved on. Because the PSDP, right now the process incentivizes building something and not focusing on the output from that. So this is an important question that we have to think about, right? Okay. Now, I think it's a very important issue to think about. We don't have a balance sheet of the government. We must have a balance sheet of the government. The government has created assets. PSDP is honesty. This vision that the PSDP does nothing is wrong. PSDP has developed a lot of assets. For example, PSDP has developed a wonderful highway system that is probably better than most highway systems. I talk about it in the States and I give a talk there. I say, look, we've got better highways in the US now. Drive from Washington to New York and drive from Islamabad to Lahore, and you'll see what I mean. This Washington to New York now looks like a village compared to Islamabad to Lahore, right? So we've got a wonderful drive from Multan to Lahore, whatever, Karachi to whatever. Point is, we've got a wonderful highway system. We've got now a wonderful, university system, minus professors. But lovely rooms, lovely lecture halls, lovely everything, underutilized, but they're there. We've got lovely stadiums, wonderful stadiums, no sports, but we've got stadiums there, right? So we've got a number of assets that we have made. The question is, they don't link up for productivity, they don't link up for growth, they don't link up for development. So we have to think about that. We must worry about our assets. How do we manage these assets, right? And that's a key thing. In fact, for example, there is no study I tried to get the sports ministry to do a study on the stadiums. There's no study available in the stadium. Look at the training academies. I think we've got about 100 training academies in the country, maybe even 200, because Lahore alone has 5 of them. That I know, sorry, no, many more, because customs, taxation, when I put them in, there's a large number of training academies in the country. Again, they are underutilized. They use maybe about 30% of the time. Is that why we create assets? Why are they not used 100% of the time? I'll tell you, in China, when I used to go for the IMF to train in China, they had built an IMF center there. I mean, Teresa will tell you. But when I went there, I remember in what's the place called? Dahlia. And they had a very interesting center. They built a hotel. They didn't build a training center. They built a hotel. And they earn money from the hotel. When the IMF team comes in, they give them a floor in an auditorium. And that's it. They don't allow the asset to sit idle. So we must have an asset focus. We must get asset evaluations. We must get an overall. We've been argued in the book that, look guys, for God's sakes, we can think of, for example, Asaduddin wanted to do, the planning minister wanted to do a fund. Why is the PSDP, when you create assets, why is that not a big fund? Why don't people borrow from the PSDP and return money to the PSDP? For example, user fees can be charged, and that will create a very nice system where user fees are charged and then you return money to the PSDP. And if you want to give subsidy to something, then the government can give the subsidy, and it will be obvious that, hey, user fees are now, and it will become transparent, that the government has decided to give Kaiser University a subsidy. It can give credits to the PSDP, and that system then becomes worthwhile, but then we become an asset. So there are a number of ways to think about it. Once you have assets that are earning a return, then you can also lever those assets and you can finance them. So that's an important to think about. So ladies and gentlemen, my last slide, I'll say, think about the issues that we are raising, and let's have a good discussion on it, and let's not make it into a lament session. We are talking about reviving a strategy for growth. Right now, we have a, what should I say? We built the frame economic growth, then came Vision 2025, there was Vision 2030 before, then Vision 2010, we had 12th 5-year plan, didn't go through, 11th 5-year plan went through, etc. You know, so it's a system that needs to be rationalized, and we need to have an overarching growth strategy, plan, whatever you might call it, which avoids fragmentation. And then we have to do what Reagan did, what Obama did, what every president has reaffirmed cost-benefit analysis at the heart of government, and I think we need to do that too. Then we have to think about changing the Huck-Hag model. The Huck-Hag model cannot, it's not sacrosanct. We must think of changing it. That should we have investment budgets that are separate from the current budgets? And within that, we must have an asset management policy. We don't have an asset management. We must maximize the return on every dollar of public investment. That's what cost benefit is. Every dollar of public investment, or every rupee, the return must be maximized. And we must change the focus from hardware to software, from brick and mortar to getting productivity going. Productivity, we've done a paper in PIDE on that. Productivity is falling in Pakistan, has been falling for a long time, and we must arrest that fall, because we can't have growth without productivity. So, ladies and gentlemen, my point in having this discussion, this debate, is that we're in 2020. What kind of a future do we envisage? I think it's time for reflection. So the whole point in this conference really is to reflect on our growth framework, to reflect on a public investment framework, to reflect on our ability to move forward for growth in the country. Unemployment rate is very high right now, and we must arrest that, because I think the graduate unemployment, IAF has done some analysis on this. The graduate unemployment rate is sitting at 40 plus, okay? And the other unemployment rate is 17 or 18, or how much the total youth unemployment? Okay, it's roughly about 20%. And these are worrying numbers, and I think we should really think about it. Planning Commission is the heart, sir. Mr. Deputy Chairman, Planning Commission is the heart of growth in Pakistan. In fact, I would argue, we have the central bank independent to look after inflation. I think we should also think about whether you call it Planning Commission, Growth Commission, whatever, there must be an independent commission for managing growth. Because there is a tension between growth and employment, or growth and inflation, which is called the Phillips curve, and somebody must manage the tension. Right now, we focus on inflation thanks to the IMF. Teresa, I'm pointing at you. Thanks to the IMF, but we forget about growth. So I think that's an important thing to think about. So thank you very much. I hope we have a good discussion on this. I'll leave it up to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor, for a very thought-provoking presentation. Shall we go straight into discussion? Let's raise our hands, introduce ourselves, and then questions or observations, please. Thank you.
This is Engineer Mansoor Malik. I had the privilege of being the founding DG of the NUS New Campus in age 12. So I'll talk about education as a sector which is covered. We set up the first innovation center way back in 2002-03, and then all incubation centers came later on. I had the privilege of raising more than 20 PC1s and developing a 760-acre large sector in Islamabad with a lot of institutions that came in, and some of them were, generating assets and productive in terms of commercialization. Others did not. So my question is purely on education economy. I had the privilege of spending 5 years in building up the existing education policy of the PTI think tank. So I was involved right at the grassroots onwards. So we've never had a whole discussion on how do we generate economy from education. Yes, we've invested, and that's a very valid thing, number one. Number two, we have not talked about, let me have a critique on the opening round of the Vice Chancellor. We've not talked about the 3-tier government system and the planning to go with it. I mean, we sitting in Islamabad with beautiful hills, we are mentally centralized system. We have now 18th Amendment, there's a planning commission, the planning department in the provinces. How do we vertically integrate that? And now, as a policy of the existing government, we go down to the district level. I went to the village level in terms of education implementation as our education policy within the party. So we're talking about 3 or 4-tier system in terms of education. How do we vertically integrate them, and then the planning. So basing on purely education as an economic driver, that's what I would like to have the views of the
I'm Dr. Hijazi, former member planning commission and currently vice chancellor, NY University. I think you have raised a very important issue, and whenever we were dealing with the PSDP, we always ignored one of the important things, which maybe under cost benefit analysis, is the employment impact of the projects, which is when you talk of the US, they are more focused on how many people are going to get the jobs as such. I think my question basically to you is, Dr. Nadeem, is that do you think that Planning Commission has the role to focus on the provincial level projects identification, that where to invest and so on? This is something which I think is out of the focus of the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Wajid Rana, former President of Finance Institute. My question is on one of the charts that was shown in the presentation, showing the impact of PSDP on growth. And there you show the impact of PSDP in Pakistan is probably the lowest as compared to India and other countries. Irwan Subramaniam, the former chief economist of India, wrote a paper on this, and he came up with 2 important conclusions. One, that the Indian growth was overestimated between 2011 to 2016. And secondly, the Indian growth was not because of PSDP, but export-led and credit-fueled domestic investment. So I just want to understand, are we overemphasizing the role of PSDP towards growth? I fully recognize the significance of PSDP. And secondly, what is the empirical evidence showing 1:1 relationship or 1:0.5 relationship towards economic economic growth.
I want to talk about the slide which showed the disaggregation of PSDP and reflected only 5% going to the social sector. Whereas we are all aware that the public investment, the highest returns are expected from investment in the social sector. You talk about cost-benefit analysis, so it's widely documented. So what is going to bring this much needed shift of bringing the focus towards this neglected sector?
Sorry. Okay, my name is Manzoor Ahmed. I'm Senior Fellow with PIDE. Dr. Nadeem, I followed you on the YouTube because I had another appointment in Guantanamo. And I heard you giving examples of several infrastructure which are like convention centers, etc. In general, I felt you were very negative about it. That's what the impression I got. But I'll give you some examples. Had you gone with me to my village just 2 years ago, it's further up from Abbottabad, Mansehra. It would take you 5 hours. Now it takes just 1 hour. And imagine the amount of time that's saved. Or you go to, say, any hospital, and the long queues you see, and it's very difficult to see a doctor. So there is, you're right that we need to balance. We have to be like accountants. I think that was the point you made. But there is, and then one other big thing. You know, just 4 or 5 years ago, we had long hours of load shedding. There will be generators all around, and now all that disappeared. So infrastructure has its importance, and I think can do a great job for growth. Thank you.
Anji, thank you, Lee. Thank you. Good questions. Let me begin with Manzoor Sahab. Manzoor Sahab, no, I'm not negative at all. I said, if you think about it, PSDP has done a very good job in building a number of things. For example, one of the best road networks in probably the world. I mean, we've got a very good road network. So I fully concede what you're saying. Very good road network. Electricity, yes, we partially solved the problem. But I don't think we solved the problem at the base, which is circular debt. We've still got 1.8 trillion circular debt not on our books, but off our books. It's going to haunt us. So have we really solved the electricity problem, or we've solved just the load shedding problem? Our prices are 22 rupees, which is very high. So I think we really have to take that's my take. We have to take an integrated approach and not just that we've solved the immediate problem. Now, so yes, PSDP has done a lot of good work, and absolutely no denying we've built 200 universities, we've built 100 sports stadiums, we built the best road network, we built energy. So those are all the credits. But on the other side, are we getting a rate of return? And I think we must be hard, like any good accountant, and ask for the rate of return and say, hey, where's the rate of return? If we build great roads, for example, M2, Manzoor Sahab, like you, I enjoy driving on M2. Great road. But is it making a rate of return? Warren would have heard from experts in general service, he'll tell you that we are not even recouping the maintenance of the road. So that's important to bear in mind. Okay, now let's turn to the other thing. Decentralization, sir, you raised the point, and Hijazi Sahab also raised the point. So decentralization is indeed a fact, a political fact, and we should take that into account. And yes, the Planning Commission's role is now that of only a federal planning commission. But if the Planning Commission, Growth Commission, whatever you might call it, whatever, if there's a central growth strategy, it will not be made independently of the provinces. So one of the roles of any growth commission would be to coordinate with the provinces. And yes, you'll have to coordinate. Coordination means a lot of intellectual activity, a lot of meeting of the minds. Once you coordinate, then you have a lot of things happening. So I think, quite frankly, setting up an ECI Secretariat or setting up interprovincial coordination ministry is not the way to go. We should have the Planning Commission play a central coordinator, or whatever, a coordinating ministry, which is what the Planning Commission is. Planning Commission role is coordination. Planning Commission, actually, even in the old HAG model, Planning Commission only coordinated the plan. It didn't make the plan. It didn't have any authority, but it had the ability to coordinate the plan. And I think that's very important. We need coordination. And decentralization, to my mind, is really a coordination problem. We must, the US does this, I mean US Treasury, every department of the US coordinates. It's a coordinating department, that's a very important thing to think about, yes. Education economy, sir, I missed your point, I'm sorry, I didn't get the question, education economy.
I mean, we've, last 24, 25 years, we've invested in education sector ever since HEC was created.
Okay.
So what kind of economic drivers have we been put in place? We set up the first incubator that I did in NUST 2002-03. We have more than 40 incubators all over the country. So what kind of economic impact the education sector per se is making?
Very important point, very good point. And I think that's the kind of analysis that the Planning Commission, the Education Ministry must be doing. That's what I mean by sectoral analysis. I think you've made a very good point. Somebody should be doing a sectoral analysis. And that is the job of the Planning Commission combined with the Education Ministry. That we must have that coordinated education sector analysis. What's happening? 200 universities, what's happening? Incubators set up, etc. So that's a very important subject. I think you made a very good point. We should think about it. Now, in terms of growth and what Rajat Rana raised, which is a very good point, that Subramaniam did contend the growth issue. And I think that kind of study we are going to do at the PIDE too. We'll look at that as to what it means for Pakistan too. And but look, every country has public investment. Forget PSDP. The US economy rose very rapidly after the Second World War when they invested in infrastructure. US economy also grew very rapidly, and Claudia Goldin and many people have shown that, very rapidly when they passed the earlier infrastructure bill, which built universities and which built the education sector, going to remember social sector thing. There are a number of studies that we can quote on this, but even in Pakistan, for example, the evidence that I gave you, and which you can look up yourself, there are studies that show the impact of public and private investment on growth. And those are what I cited. Then the impact of public and private investment, yes, does impact growth. The public investment is weak in its correlation with growth. I don't make hard statements because econometrics is not hard. It has to be interpreted with caution, but it just tells you that there is a weak, relationship between growth and investment, public investment. But we must expect, I think that's the whole basis of cost-benefit analysis. Otherwise, there's no point in having public investment. Public investment must impact growth. If it doesn't, we should really reconsider why we are spending our money. Because infrastructure ultimately is supposed to impact growth. Productivity is supposed to impact growth. So yes, I think those are questions that must be asked. In terms of member social sector program, look, yes, social sector is neglected. Absolutely, because there's no cost-benefit analysis and hardware projects seem to sell. Like the metro project, for example. I think the metro project, if we done a serious cost-benefit analysis, would have been shown to have a low return as opposed to other objectives. Cost-benefit also means that you look at choices. We didn't look at choices, we just went for the metro. So we probably spent far more money on public transport than we needed to. So and those are things that we have to think about. And social sector has become a brick and mortar game, given HEC's mandate. That, hey, let's build universities. As you know, DGs have also said, we build universities. We don't build education. So those are things, hypotheses that I'm not going to assert that this is a given, but those are hypotheses that need to be tested. Thank you.
Let's have the next round of questions, please.
I would just like your reactions to having a sub-national focus on growth as well, because after the 18th Amendment, yes, I think at the provincial level also there are planning and development departments, and I don't understand whether there is any work relating the projects that they submit for approval to the working parties, how much of an impact analysis of that project or that public investment on growth and employment is actually conceived also. So point well taken. Second is efficiency of public expenditures. I think research shows that we are very inefficient in the way we utilize public expenditures. So any thoughts on how, given the state of capacity at the federal and the provincial level to utilize public expenditures, any ideas about how to maybe reorient the way public expenditures are spent to get a better rate of return from the money? Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Fuzail. I'm a private consultant, engineer, finance background. I was just wondering, when I looked at your presentation, you made a good point about ROA, but coming from the finance and accounting background, I don't see how you can calculate or even estimate ROA of a, say, hospital. Yes, for M2, it's easy. The toll collection, the taxes paid by those businesses, the fuel savings. So maybe with 70-75% accuracy, you can do ROA. But for a hospital, which is or a university, how do you calculate an ROA? I mean, unless you are charging a high fee from the students, and then you say how much of the revenues and how much is the expenses, and then you calculate ROA. That's not what governments do. Make profitable projects. They make services available for public goods. I may not be able to correctly put it, but I'm sure all of you know that. As against ROA, perhaps KPIs, key performance indicator, is a better expression. And I'm sure Planning Commission with PC2, PC3, PC4, and 5, they are equipped. They're supposed to do KPIs. I mean, how on earth they pass PC2 without mentioning the KPIs? So you want to build 40 incubators, 40 science labs, Higher Education Commission, Planning Commission with Higher Education Commission. How do you measure, what are the KPIs? I'm sure they're doing it. If they are not doing it, then it's a problem. Third area that I want to comment on is public sector development programs should have more of PPP, public-private partnerships. That's how ROA and KPIs will be monitored. It will become easy. Sorry for the long expression.
Khalid Rahim, I work independently with different think tanks. My approach here is that we need to make some changes. First of all, having lived and worked in states from Canada, time and space are the two things. Here we have no time management, need a space adjustment. Coming to education, we stress on sending people for PhD abroad, spend millions on them. How about spending millions on the little child so that he doesn't grow up with a fixed mindset? And that fixed mindset then does his PhD, he does not return with a growth mindset, he comes back with the same fixed mindset.
Thank you. Good. I'm a lab scientist, but I've worked in the Planning Commission, also educational institutions. I've done research, teaching and production. And I've exported high-tech systems, scientific systems to Malaysia, Switzerland and Germany. Total worth about 28 billion rupees, but that's another matter. We talk of return on investments, and then also about public-private partnership. One of the things we should stay away from is public-private partnerships. This was a buzzword introduced by the World Bank in the 90s. A decade later, they said we made a mistake. It works best in toll collection. Elsewhere, it's rent-seeking and causes a lot of problems. The government must make up its mind whether it wants to implement certain things or does it want to pass it out to the private sector. So there are two different models. You can't have a mixture, except in very special cases. Now, this is something that the government is not clear about. It gets confused. Also, returns on education, on investment, we have one of the lowest formal enrollments in technical vocational education. We have no skills. Skills for the present or skills for the future. It's not a PhD. A PhD is disposable in my view, if you look at economics. You need skills. We can't even manage infrastructure. We can't manage pick up the garbage. We can't build a road properly. We can't design a dam after 70. We did that. The Rawal Dam was built by Pakistanis, designed by them. Now it doesn't call you consultants. So there is something seriously wrong. The orientation has to be changed. And my view is, if you want to play catch up, many models before us, but forget the 19th century, the nearest example for us is China. You pick the winning areas, the winning sectors, you go for them. Thank you.
This is Dr. Hussain Abdi, member Science and Technology Planning Commission. So I would like to second my colleague here who just expressed his opinion. At the same time, in one of the slides, I saw that the science and technology investment in 2013, whatever that number was, but that declined in 2018 and 19. Which is really worrisome actually, because if you really want to stimulate growth, you also want to be part of the globalized economies. And for that, if you can see that science and technology investment in public sector globally is actually raising exponentially. The trend is absolutely reverse in our case. So who decides the sectorial priorities to begin with? You also mentioned that the role of planning is just to coordinate. So which means that the respective of the line ministries are supposed to develop those sectorial priorities for investment. But the real fact is that the line ministries, we all know that the capacities at this point in space. So maybe we should it's easy to build the capacity of, let's say, the planning commission to take an additional charge to work with the line ministries to come with a better priorities to invest in. And last point would be that we should also see to China, as my colleague just mentioned, they use science and technology as a tool in the last from 1988 to 2002. I mean, they were able to generate about $200 billion just from the science and technology revolution. So that's where the real growth is. That's where you can get the best returns on the dividends on the investment, which is very much still true, when we think about the globalization that comes. Thank you.
Sir, I'd just like to add with your permission, science and technology is not a magic wand. It can only work in congruence with social capabilities. So that's a very different part to it.
Thank you. I'm Mrs. Walla from the European Union. I have just a quick question. Under the PFM project, which we were supporting, I had the opportunity to visit some schools in Sindh. And indeed, one of the problems was a broken wall of the school. And the schoolmaster we met said, well, actually I cannot repair the wall because this depends on the province decisions. And I think that the distance, I understood that the distance between the grassroots and the districts and the central departments is very big. And I was wondering what would be the model and the way forward to shorten that distance between the needs from the district and grassroots to the provinces. Thank you.
If you can show that slide of the multiplier once again.
Who's running the slides?
Can you just elaborate which study actually drive all these multipliers? Is it an authenticated sort of work?
Yeah, with the sugar. We're doing it.
So already the values of the multiplier you all got?
We are doing the study.
Okay.
And
No, but the value, like you said, multiplier for private investment to GDP growth is 0.35. So this value, it came from where?
From a study that we are doing right now.
Oh, it's not yet completed.
No, not yet.
Okay, because this is the crucial sort of a numbers, and if your study finally gets into, if you say that GDP growth is 0.35 is the multiplier for that, and as compared to public investment 0.05 and PSDP 0.03, so it's supposed to be altogether a change in the policy. That instead of spending money on the schools yourself, you have to give it to the private sector to go and do it. Instead of making a bridge yourself, you go to the private sector and say, okay, you make the bridge if you find it fit. So this is something, I mean, I don't know what is going to be the ratio of the PSDP when we talk about highways and all that, supporting the private sector. That have to be determined first, like without, Dr. Manzoor mentioned that, there's a highway connecting to Mansehra. I mean, it has got a lot of impact on economic development of smaller projects, without road, this is not possible. But from here, what you have tried to conclude is that, the government, as like you were mentioning about the United States, who have over time has moved from private sector more to the public sector. I don't know for what are the reasons, but we have a very strong public sector and we have got a very weak private sector, and this is not talking about the public-private partnership, but I think it's important that we should think about it, that how much of this should be handed over to the private sector. I totally disagree with schools to be given to the private sector. Universities are okay. But coming down to other projects, how much, I think this is some sort of a conclusion you have to draw out of this discussion.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Madhya, I'm from PIDE. I think in context of PhD, one thing is how funds are allocated, right? And the other thing is that how things are managed when funds are allocated. So I think human capital side of the public institution is very important. And in this context, I would like to point out to the recent seminar that was held in PIDE by Dr. Ishrat Hussain. I think where he showed that the institutional reform these right now which are going on, now they have devised a process in which based on KPIs, the performing ones will be rewarded, and non-performing, the ones who do not perform in 3 years will be taken out of the government. I think that's very important to have a filtering system so that we don't have like a permanent sort of arrangement that people enter, they always stay without working.
My name is Ilyas Fadil. I was recently the CEO of the Oil Companies Advisory Council and have also been member oil OGRA in 2009. My question basically or comment relates to the energy sector. When we look at the problems that the energy sector is facing, what comes clear is that we don't even know what the ideal energy mix for the country is. We have our own resources, but we continue to import product, whereas our own resources are underutilized. My question is that is there a planning commission study on this, ongoing study analysis, which has to be ongoing? It cannot be a fixed study that the energy requirement of today is going to continue to be the energy requirement for the future. So my question is there a short, medium or long-term analysis of this in this particular area?
I think thank you very much for very good questions, all very germane and all very well thought out, I agree. Let me begin with your question last. I think that raises a very important point which underpins everything. We have had an energy crisis, Mr. Chairman, for the last 12 years, where we experienced load shedding, we bled fiscally, we bled in terms of economic growth. So My estimate, and we can talk about that at some other forum because we'll do an energy conference a little later. My estimate is we've lost about 30% of GDP over the last 12 years, which is probably more than what we spend on education. And when we are losing this, we have had no study. This is my lament, exactly what you said is my lament too, that through the 12 years of the energy crisis, there has really been no study on the energy sector. Yes, there have been stray studies like PIDE might do some, somebody else might do some, but there's been no official study. And there's been no official clarity on where this thing, and that's where I dovetail into this, that look, that's why we need sectoral plans. Somebody said something about skills and higher versus lower education, again that requires a sectoral study. Again that requires sectoral planning. Again that requires, hey, are we thinking about a sectoral strategy? Are we just multiplying projects? So I think one of the overarching themes that we at least studied in this book is that there is a need for some sectoral strategy, there is a need for some idea of where we are going, instead of just multiplying projects. I remember every MNA thinks he knows, he's a planner, so he comes along with a project and we do it. So, but we need sectoral strategy. So a large number of your questions, whether it's the role of the private sector, PPP, all these things relate to one very important efficiency of projects that's earlier raised, ROAs versus KPIs that you raised. Very important questions. I don't think we need to shrug them away and say we know the answers. They're very tough questions, and this is where you're saying cost-benefit analysis can't do return on assets. I disagree totally. It's done everywhere in the world. UK does it, US does it, everybody does it. Even to the extent, sir, of putting in the value of human life. We do calculate the value of human life. It's not as if we don't. So we do put in everything in a cost-benefit analysis. KPI is another method. I'm not saying it's that we don't need both. We need both. It's not as if that one can supplant the other. The problem is we're looking for short answers very quickly. And that's where we make the mistake. We need careful study in everything. Winning sectors ki baat hui hai, science, sci-tech ki baat hui hai. We built incubators. Where is the incubator policy? I don't see an incubator policy. I see incubators. All these things I'm looking for a study. But so there's a fundamental problem, the book that I read last year on the research system. Every country is spending money on research. China actually made up its mind. We like to quote China a lot, but we like to quote China selectively. China made up its mind in 2000 to be a research country. They started targeting 2.5% GDP just to be spent on research. Don't mind, not higher education, not lower education, just research. Today they are over 2.5%, and they're going to 3%. US spends 4% on research. How much do we spend on research? 0.2%. And that also is an exaggeration because 0.2% is really an office expenditure or something, not really research. So the question is, on research, we've got a bias here that our scientific friends say, I looked at the HEC budget, they only spend on so-called science and tech, and now there's this incubator drive. Public policy, there's no money for research. So quite frankly, on public policy, we spend zero. Public policy is done on the fly, or public policy is outsourced to the donors. So there's a big problem here. How are we actually making our growth policy? What underpins the projects? Is it just a collection of projects? I'm the powerful guy, I can say, do this, we build that. Or if some Prime Minister says, like Shawaz Sharif said, build the metro, we built the metro, without looking at the choices. So we built a metro with a very low rate of return, in fact with a big subsidy element, with the result that is the metro going to add to growth? I don't know. And that's something that needs to be studied. So my submission to you in all these questions is research priorities, all these things. Look guys, we really need a dialogue like this, I would say almost every year. We need people to scrutinize our development priorities, our plans, and that was what the plan was. And we've given up. 18th Amendment, we talk a lot about it. The role of the coordinator is not an empty role. The coordinator is the most important person in the game. If he coordinates well, coordination, as I said, is a meeting of minds. Coordination is not simply, just passing paper from left to right. Somebody has to sit down and play the arbiter, play the role, but you can't do that if you don't have research behind you, if you don't have thinking behind you. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to be talked about. We can't do it in one session, we can't even do it in one day, but I think we're just opening the door. Let's try and make this cerebral, let's try and return to thinking, and that's the most important point that I make. Thank you.
So thank you once again, Vice Chancellor, for taking all these questions, and to all of you for raising very, very important aspects which concern what Nadeem Rathod call as doing development better. We start by refocusing on which is our topic today, and the question whether or not it impacts development outcomes leading to growth. And that question is still in the answer phase because some work is going on. But clearly, even anecdotally, we can see that the impact, if it is there, is not as it should be. And the evidence is available over a large period of time to see how the expenditures, the public expenditures have impacted growth. And I would also add equity in that. Growth without equity would remain one limb, and therefore the equity component is also very important. But before we talk of the PSDP, I was trying to list the titles that need to be addressed, and somehow they all start with a P. And I have about 8 or 9 P's listed here. The first one is policy. Anything that you do without a policy would not lead you in the direction where you want to go. So it reminds me of Alice in Wonderland. If you don't know where you're going, you could go anywhere. And policy lays down some of the fundamental rules and framework, and I think the policy is very weak. Either there are very few written policies, and written policies are important because they hold everybody accountable. They make the frameworks in which public officials are accountable, the private sector knows what's going to happen, the citizen can ask questions. But did we ever have a tax policy? I don't think we ever had a written tax policy. For that matter, we don't have currently we don't have an industrial policy. It's stated. We don't have an agriculture policy, and so on and so forth. And we can talk about other areas, not only of development, but also in the foreign realm. Having a foreign policy, for instance. So policy is extremely important, and I looked at the origin of this word, work, and it comes from polity. And the Latin origin really talks about the city, the people. So this is at the heart of governance, writing and doing good policy work. And policy leads us to plans. But if we are making plans without having the policies, then there's something fundamentally wrong. And plans are not meant to give some grand ideas, but give some roadmaps and milestones and tentative steps on how we would get there. And plans obviously then have to have some targets that you need to achieve. So whether we do 5 years or 3 years is immaterial, because a plan should be a dynamic activity, upgraded every year. And then out of the plan, we get into programs. And when Vice Chancellor talks about the project approach, precisely it is my understanding that it is versus the program approach, which is by and large lacking. And because project is all about development budget, we do not factor in the current expenditures which would be there in a programmatic approach. So going over to the programmatic approach would be very, very important in my view. And of course, there would be projects, and projects should be well conceived, and they should be aligned to the policy, aligned to the plan, and coming out of the program. So there's coherence. Projects which do not have coherence with the policy and the plan would not lead to the outcomes that we expect them to have. I think, which is the concept of public good. And to my mind, this is an extremely important concept. And in countries which are short on resources and weak in capacities, public good should be defined very, very narrowly. Because when we expand the definition of public good, we take upon ourselves responsibilities that we are unable to discharge. So the question of public good, and this is not a debate that I hear very often in the government or in the society, about the role of the government, the role of the state. And if it is kept as narrow as possible, as I said, for developing countries, it is helpful. It is helpful because it allows us to concentrate on our limited capacities and focus them in a way that we can deliver what we seek to deliver. But once you have a fair understanding of public good, then the choice of whether there should be public investment or private investment becomes rather easy. And this requires that the footprint of the public sector is reduced so that you have more private space for investment as well as management and productivity. We do understand governments all over the world are not good managers. So they should limit their management capacities to areas where the private managers will not step in because of the constraint of it being a public good. We have not seen improvement in investments in the country, and the deficit, both infrastructure and the human resource deficit, is huge. We talk about children who are stunted, out of school children, lack of immunization, we're still struggling with polio. These are the fundamental questions that we need to ask ourselves. Not being able to get clean water across to the citizens, bereft of sanitation. And these are not high-level issues, but issues that concern the communities and the population and the locals on a daily basis. So reducing the footprint, and then I heard partnerships, the views about partnerships as well, but there would be some areas in which the public sector will have to support the private sector to work, either because of the risk management or because there would be some kind of a viability gap. If we look at it in this framework, then PSDP should, in my view, become a private sector development program. And the public sector investment should be in support of that program. I don't have answers, but Vice Chancellor, so that you can do more research. We talk about coordination, and this was mentioned during the course of our discussion also. It's used very, very loosely. As was mentioned, coordination is not about writing letters or holding meetings or getting things done together, but there is now evidence, and the World Bank has done a recent study which says that coordination failure is often at the heart of lack of development outcomes. And this is a very, very important issue in our setup, because it's not only across vertical the tiers of government that were mentioned, it's also intra-governmental within the ministries and the divisions of the government. coordination is challenging. So we all talk about 3 or 4 or 5 tiers of government and how we can bring it closer to the communities. We also have to remember that a multi-tiered system is a very complex system to administer. It needs a degree of political sophistication also. Local governments work best in unitary form of government. With a central government which does limited functions, and most of the functions are given the European model, except Germany. Germany and the United States both are federal countries and also have good local governments. But we must remember the level of political sophistication that is also has to the elected officials, the local, the provincial, the federal, need to have the ability to have dialogue, talk, and coordinate, and then come to conclusions and do trade-offs which would lead to the outcomes. Otherwise, we see, even now, I think we have a major issue in Karachi. There's a local government, and there's a provincial government, and there's a federal government. And there's a challenge of coordinating all these three governments. So let's look at this very, very deeply and carefully. The institutions of development are very important. Planning Commission is one, but there are many, many institutions which have a role in development. The discussion, the policy framework, the cabinet, the Council of Common Interest, the National Economic Council, the Interprovincial Coordination Council, the National Finance Commission, the Indus River System Authority. All of these are institutions of development. I could name some more also. But how do they integrate and work together so that the development discourse is not only about PSDP but about how to harness the wealth of the society, both in monetary and human terms. Vice Chancellor mentioned this, the politicization of development. My own understanding is that post-1985 development model has not delivered. And it has not delivered because the demand is so huge. So when we talk about politicization, there would always be a demand from the elected representatives for certain services in the area. Be it roads or hospitals or colleges, so on and so forth. There would always be demand because there is a need. But when that demand gets so fragmented that we have to address every constituency, then there cannot be any informed planning. And so the outcome of the post-1985 development model has been large number of infrastructure assets, school, colleges, but not resourced for service delivery because the current expenditures are not available. And then maybe every union council wants a college, whether or not it's feasible, and how can we make a distinction between higher education, which should be available to those who are eligible, and basic education or schooling, followed by training in some scale and location to those who are in wide numbers. So when you speak about the universities, we should be asking ourselves whether university education is an entitlement and why is the public sector spending so much in it. And the question of defining public good would return to us on that. The post-1985 development model does not allow for investments in areas which do not have local dividends. If you look at the allocations for research prior to 1985 and subsequent to 1985, you will see how research has slided. And we are aware that there is no country which has made progress in agriculture unless it has invested in agricultural research. And when you look at our research institutions, their budgets are largely salary budgets with some small allocations for fuel, electricity, traveling and medical allowances. They are starved of research budgets. So PSDP could be a research budget actually. And then maybe the cost benefit would be a little difficult to ascertain, but the dividends will be very many, as you mentioned in China, how research, particularly adaptive research, because we are a beneficiary of what happens around the world. There are societies which invest huge amounts. And this is again the China model. They adapted so many things and made it cheaper to produce the same things and became a factory for the world. Getting back investments into research and development would be one of the key focuses. And then cross-cutting issues, climate change, population, nutrition, land, water. All of these are cross-cutting issues which are across constituencies. And therefore they all need attention. We've also noticed that there's some national focus on growth. I think very important point that you make, madam. Because the provinces are really doing a lot of things now. And mostly on their own. So the question is not whether or not there should be a federal direction, but there must be a national direction. Provinces are quite jealous about their authority, and rightly so. But there are not enough institutions of bringing them together for debate and dialogue, both at the level of the civil service and at the political level, so that we have a harmonized national growth policy and agenda. So right now we have about 5 GST regimes. Each province has its own general sales tax on services. And businesses have to deal with 5 regulators, 5 collectors. And this is an area which requires a lot of attention. So the regulatory side and how to deregulate and then re-regulate. By deregulation I would imply allowing more competition. And by re-regulating, I see that there should be a fair playing field for everybody, and the consumer should have the ability to seek questions and seek answers. There are very many things, but we have arrived at 11:30. This is a very useful dialogue. I'm grateful to PIDE for assembling us all together. My final point is that it's very important to understand the problem. We all have our own views on the problem. But unless you have an informed understanding of the problem, the solution would evade us. Thank you very much, everyone.
Before we close, can I make a formal presentation to you of the book? Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. It was a very interesting, insightful discussion. Before we move forward, we have arrangements for tea outside. Let's grab tea, and we'll be back here at 11:45. It's a quick 15 minutes tea.